Hello, my name is Dr. Kerry Jo Lee. I am the Associate Director for Rare Diseases and the lead of the Rare Diseases team in Siba. And I'm here to share with you Cedars' perspective on working together with our rare disease partners within Cedar and across the FDA. This is my disclosure just to remind you this presentation is not intended to convey official U.S. FDA policy and that no official support or endorsement by the U.S. FDA is provided or should be inferred. The materials presented are available in the public domain. The learning objectives for my talk are as follows. We're here to discuss rare disease and orphan product approval trends and Cedars' organization, focusing on the Office of New Drugs. We're going to describe Cedars' rare diseases team and PDUFA 6 commitments. We're going to describe Cedars' proposed PDUFA 7 commitments, which include the Rare Disease Endpoint Advancement Pilot Program. And we're here to describe Cedars' new Accelerating Rare Disease Cures Program. Cedar ensures that safe and effective drugs are available to improve the health of people in the United States. And when it comes to rare diseases, we have made progress. Between 2015 and 2021, nearly half of all of our novel drugs approved were for rare diseases. In addition, over 600 treatments for rare diseases have been FDA approved since the passage of the Orphan Drug Act in 1983. However, despite this significant progress, we still have a lot of work to do. Of the approximately 7,000 rare diseases, the vast majority lack an FDA-approved treatment. This slide really demonstrates the progress that we're making in rare disease product development, and it shows that progress over time. Specifically from 2010 to 2021, you can see that we have columns for each year divided into the number of orphan drug novel approvals, which are in green, and the number of non-orphan drug novel approvals, which are in blue. The purple line above indicates the percentage of orphan drug approvals for any given approval year. Since 2010, you can see that the number of orphan drug approvals has risen dramatically, and in addition, the percentage of these approvals has increased. I would also like to note that these rare disease drug programs span across every O&D division. This slide is a visual representation of Cedars' use of expedited drug development programs. These are the programs that we have intended to facilitate expedite drug development and review of new drugs that have unmet medical need in the treatment of serious or life-threatening conditions. You'll note that in dark blue, we have the percentages of orphan novel new molecular entity approvals in darker blue, next to the percentages of non-orphan non-molecular entities in the lighter blue, from the years 2015 to 2021. The takeaway here is that our orphan drug programs make use of these programs for expedited drug development to provide more focus and resources on qualifying rare disease drug development programs. Now I'd like to take a minute just to discuss Cedars' reorganization within Cedar and the Office of New Drugs specifically, or O&D. We recognize the importance of collaboration, and we took steps to modernize the new drug during the New Drug Regulatory Program. In 2020, the Office of New Drugs reorganization was completed, and this slide shows an overview of the clinical offices and divisions within the Office of New Drugs at Cedar. The reorganization of O&D created offices that aligned interrelated disease areas and divisions with clearer and more focused areas of expertise. The Office of New Drugs is now comprised of 6 cross-functional support offices and 8 clinical offices that are shown here. You can see from this slide that those 8 clinical offices oversee 27 clinical review divisions as well as 6 Pharm Tox review divisions. Within the Office of Rare Diseases, Pediatrics, Urologic and Reproductive Medicine, there is now a rare disease hub that sits in the Division of Rare Diseases and Medical Genetics, or DRDMG. When you look at DRDMG, you really have two wings. You have the rare diseases team, which focuses on rare disease-related cross-cutting programming, policy, education, and engagement across Cedar. And then you have the Inborn Errors Review Group, which focuses on application-specific development work for pre-INDs, INDs, as well as NDAs and BLAs. To talk to you a little bit more about Cedar's Rare Diseases team and what we do, our mission is really to facilitate, support, and accelerate the development of drugs and therapeutic biologics for rare diseases. We are a multidisciplinary team that is located within the Division of Rare Diseases and Medical Genetics and ORPURM. Some select activities that we perform in line with our PDUFA mandates are to provide other advice to other review divisions on their rare disease programs as requested, sharing cross-cutting learnings and experiences, to promote rare disease considerations across Cedar's Office of New Drugs, to lead cross-cutting O&D rare disease guidances, policies, strategic research, and workshops, to develop rare disease training and education, and to engage with internal and external stakeholders to promote rigorous rare disease drug development. I wanted to delve just a little bit further into sharing some selected rare disease team activities and responsibilities and talk a little bit about how we collaborate with our rare disease partners across the FDA on these efforts, because our focus and our PDUFA mandates really involve multiple partners across the FDA. For example, our draft guidances, which are Cedar and Sieber guidances, we lead from the Cedar standpoint, the natural history studies for drug development and the rare diseases common issues in drug development. In terms of programming, we lead and manage the International Rare Disease Cluster with the European Medicines Agency as a partner and Health Canada as a current observer. Other drug product centers and the participants from the Office of Commissioner attend as well as needed depending on the topic. We have the Rare Disease Drug Development Council, which discusses rare disease issues with a group of Cedar experts in rare disease, as well as applications, and this is also open to our colleagues from the other centers to attend. We have the PDUFA 6 and proposed 7 rare disease commitments that we utilize many of these programs to fulfill, and those are joint commissions with the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, and we work very closely together with our colleagues in order to fulfill those. We lead quarterly rare disease seminar series, and this is our quarterly seminars for FDA staff. We host internal and external experts on topics that are important for rare disease drug development. Those are open for all FDA staff to attend. We additionally host an annual rare disease annual reviewer training day. And for that, we specifically seek input from our other centers and plan that together, as well as with the Office of Commissioner, in order to perform annual training in rare disease-related policy and review for FDA review staff. When it comes to engagement, some of the functions we may perform might be hosting a meeting, such as the FDA NIH Regulatory Fitness and Rare Disease Trials Conference that just occurred this past May. We give public meeting presentations for rare disease stakeholders. We particularly work with our colleagues across the center, such as OOPD, to ensure there is Cedar representation for the FDA Rare Disease Day. We may attend alongside divisions and other centers patient-focused drug development meetings and patient listening sessions, and similarly with rare disease critical path innovation meetings. And these are just some of the many ways in which we sort of participate, manage, and lead collaborations across FDA in rare disease drug development. Next, I'm going to talk about the PDUFA 7 commitment. Proposed PDUFA 7 commitment, the Rare Disease Endpoint Advancement Pilot Program, and give you just an overview of that. The scope is that we are going to provide a mechanism for sponsors to collaborate with us throughout efficacy endpoint development processes for rare diseases. Endpoints are eligible for this proposal if they are part of development programs that are active and address rare diseases, so meaning an active IND or pre-IND. There are some caveats to that, so sponsors who do not yet have an active development program but have a natural history study where the proposed endpoint is intended to be studied are also eligible to apply. Also, the FDA may consider for this program accepting a proposal for a development program for a common disease that includes innovative or novel endpoints, including a specific endpoint or methodology being developed if there is sufficient justification that the proposal could be applied or applicable to a rare disease. The second point of this is that the proposed endpoint is novel, right? A novel efficacy endpoint, because this is one of the challenges we find in rare disease drug development, intended to establish substantial evidence of effectiveness for rare disease treatment. An endpoint is novel if it's never been used to support a drug approval before, or if it has been substantially modified from previous use to support drug approval. We're going to give preference to proposals that have the potential to impact drug development more broadly, so one that uses a novel approach to develop an efficacy endpoint, or an endpoint that could potentially be relevant to other diseases. And we really hope to sort of maximize learnings from this by accepting a range of different types of endpoints. Continuing on about the Rdea program, FDA is going to select a limited number of qualified proposals. We start in the first year, which is one proposal in Q4 that we will accept, and that ramps up to one proposal per quarter with a maximum of 3 per year for the remaining years of the PDUFA commitment. Transparency is important to this in order to share what we learn and really lift up rare disease drug development as widely as possible. And to that end, we will be conducting up to 3 public workshops by the end of the commitment to discuss various topics related to endpoint development and share learnings. To promote innovation in evolving science, the novel endpoints we develop through Rdea may be presented by the FDA in accordance to any disclosure agreements that are reached, such as in guidance documents, public-facing website, public workshops, etc. I'm not going to read this slide verbatim, but it's really a very good picture of the Rdea meeting process and timeline for those looking to submit, all the way from day 0, which is the day that you submit a proposal for acceptance, into the potential Rdea pilot program, going all the way through until when we are scheduling meetings within 45 days of receipt of a complete briefing document. As part of this process, the sponsor may participate in up to 4 of these focused meetings. So just to conclude discussion about the Rdea proposed pilot program, sponsors who've completed the maximum of 4 meetings or do not have additional endpoint-focused questions or issues may just proceed with the standard regulatory submission process that we are familiar with. The advice that the FDA provides during and between these meetings does not constitute a regulatory decision and is considered non-binding. Completing the 4 Rdea meetings does not guarantee approval for regulatory submission, and that includes efficacy endpoints discussed during the Rdea meetings. And finally, after completion of these 4 meetings, a sponsor can, of course, request additional and continued input from the FDA as needed through our other formal meeting mechanisms. I would just like to sort of conclude this discussion about PDUFA commitments with that this is another way in which we collaborate. PDUFA commitments for the rare disease programs are both for the product development centers of Cedars and Sieber, and we work very closely with our partners in terms of implementing and considering these programs. I'd like to end with a little bit just about Cedars ARC program, or the Accelerating Rare Disease Cures program that we are very excited about. The vision for our program is speeding and increasing the development of effective and safe treatment options to address the unmet needs of patients with rare diseases. Our mission is to drive scientific and regulatory innovation and engagement to accelerate the availability of these treatments for patients with rare diseases. Why does Cedar feel the need to create this program? Well, we have a lot of common challenges in rare disease drug development. These are small and sometimes very small patient populations that really provide challenging and complex ways of trying to design and interpret these trials. There's genotypic and phenotypic heterogeneity within diseases. The natural history is often poorly understood. We often have serious and life-threatening, slowly progressive diseases at times, as well as the considerations that come with pediatric drug development, as many of these occur in childhood, have a childhood onset. There's challenges with trial designs. There's reluctance to randomized placebo. At times, there's challenges with drug development tools not being established. So, for example, efficacy endpoints. There's limited, if any, regulatory precedent for many of these programs. And of course, it's challenging to incorporate regulatory flexibility while ensuring that we really uphold regulatory standards. Cedars ARC program, just to take a look, will work across the FDA. Cedar, as you saw previously, is a very large organization. And to this end, the Cedar ARC program leadership will be comprised of senior leaders that sort of have their hand on the pulse of rare disease drug development from the Office of New Drugs, the Office of the Center Director, and the Office of Translational Science. The ARC Program Management Office will be the rare diseases team, as is in line with our mission and mandates. We fully expect this program will work across Cedar, so with partner offices such as the Office of Medical Policy, Office of Surveillance and Epidemiology, Office of Strategic Programs, and any other Cedar offices or divisions in which expertise and collaboration is relevant to achieve our mission. We will also continue to work in close collaboration with our partners in the other product centers of Sieber and CBER, as well as the Oncologic Center of Excellence, and continue to work with the Office of the Commissioner, Office of Clinical Policy and Programs offices, such as the Office of Orphan Products Development, the Patient Affairs staff, and the Office of Pediatric Therapeutics, just to name a few. We really think that Cedar's organization around the ARC program will really enhance our ability to work with our partners across the FDA. Year one for ARC is a focus on engagement. This engagement will inform Cedar of our stakeholder priorities and their needs in rare disease drug development. Some of that engagement is evidenced by the recent FDA NIH Regulatory Fitness and Rare Disease Clinical Trials Conference, from which we got incredible input from external stakeholders. And that was a joint venture between the Cedars Rare Diseases team and the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences. That conference really focused on academic investigators, as they are so critical to rare disease drug development, and how they can best bridge that gap between academic investigation and regulatory aspects of drug development. We additionally, in May, had a meeting, the FDA and Duke Margolis put on a meeting into translational science and drug development, surrogate endpoints, biomarkers, and more, how we can really best focus on creating some strong translational science, particularly around the development of surrogate endpoints. And finally, as well, completely critical to drug development is our patients. So patients and patient organizations, engagement from the Cedar ARC program will be led by patient-focused drug development staff who will lead enhanced patient engagement through public workshops. So please just follow our page to see when those are announced and how you can be involved. In conclusion, the takeaways from my presentation are that in recent years, over 50% of Cedar's novel drug approvals were for rare diseases. The Rare Diseases team at Cedar works to facilitate, support, and accelerate the development of drugs and therapeutic biologics for rare diseases. Cedar collaborates with rare disease partners across the FDA to advance drug development. And in year one, Cedar's ARC program will help Cedar work more effectively with our rare disease drug development partners. Finally, some challenge questions. Looking at Cedar novel drug approvals, so say 2015 to 2021, approximately what percentage are for use in non-rare diseases versus what percentage in rare orphan designated products? Is the answer 64% versus 30%, 50% versus 50%, 30% versus 64%, 44% versus 22%? The answer is 50% versus 50%. Next question. The Rdea program the proposed Rdea program will provide the opportunity for sponsors to engage with the FDA in what aspect of drug development? Multi-form drug development, complex innovative design, rare disease endpoint advancement, or all of the above? And the answer is rare disease endpoint advancement. Thank you very much for your time. And now over to the next portion of our program.
Hey, thanks so much for that introduction. Great to be here today to speak with you together with my Cedar and Sieber colleagues about product development for patients with rare diseases. My talk will focus on incentives and resources FDA has available to help you with product development. So a couple of learning objectives. There's two of them. First, I hope at the end of this talk you'll be able to describe, at least in a general way, the incentive programs to aid development of drugs targeting rare diseases. And second, I hope you become aware of all the rich FDA resources that are available to help you with your programs. You know, before I came to FDA, I was in industry for more than 10 years. And it wasn't until I got here that I realized all the great stuff FDA makes available to help sponsors with their programs. And, oh, one more thing. There are some challenge questions that I have embedded in my talk today, so pay attention. Be aware. Stay on your toes. So let's start out with a couple of definitions. First of all, what is a rare disease? Well, for product development, it's defined by law, and it's different for drugs and biologics versus devices. So for drugs and biologics in the United States, diseases that affect less than 200,000 people are considered rare diseases. So I call that a threshold. Less than 200,000 people, it's considered a rare disease. If it's 200,000 in one person, it's not a rare disease. It's just that cut and dry. For devices, it's diseases with an incidence of less than or equal to 8,000 people per year in the United States. So examples of rare diseases are, for example, cystic fibrosis, Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, sickle cell disease, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis or ALS, and pancreatic cancer. Each of those diseases has less than 200,000 people in the United States. So these definitions, though, are for the United States, and if you're a developer of a product outside the United States, the definitions will vary by territory. So, for example, in the European Union, the EU, the threshold for drugs and biologics is a prevalence rate of less than 5 per 10,000 people. And in Japan, it's a prevalence rate of less than 4 per 10,000 people to be considered a rare disease. So if you're developing your product globally, it's important to be aware of the statutory thresholds in each territory that you're developing your product in. And one more definition. What's an orphan product? Well, in the United States, an orphan product is one that demonstrates promise or medical plausibility for the diagnosis, treatment, or prevention of a rare disease or condition, and can include any of the following. Drugs. For example, a orphan product would be tolvaptan to treat autosomal dominant polycystic kidney disease. The orphan product is tolvaptan, and the rare disease is autosomal dominant polycystic kidney disease. It also includes biologics. An example would be, say, gene therapy to treat spinal muscular atrophy. The gene therapy will be the orphan product. Spinal muscular atrophy is the rare disease. Medical devices can also be orphan products. For example, artificial heart to treat heart failure in pediatric patients. That would be considered, the artificial heart would be considered a medical device. And there's also medical foods. So medical foods can be orphan products. An example would be a phenylalanine-free formula to treat PKU. But for this talk today, I'm just going to focus on the first three categories: drugs, biologics, and medical devices. Now, one of the reasons that we have incentives and resources, especially available for rare diseases, is because there are challenges in developing these products. And there's a number of challenges. One is that there can be genotypic and phenotypic heterogeneity within the population. And if there's significant heterogeneity, it's very hard to prove a hypothesis in a clinical trial. And we understand that. So that's a challenge. Another is that by the very nature of these diseases being rare, you can have very small, widely dispersed patient population. We see products for development programs that the disease is less than 100 people worldwide. That can be a very challenging development program. Sometimes the natural history of the disease is often not well understood, and that also makes development challenging. And finally, another reason that is special to rare diseases is the complexity in identifying the appropriate endpoints. If you are a developer of a product in the United States, you probably know that the primary endpoint for FDA approval of a product has to affect the way a patient feels, functions, or survives, with some exceptions, but that's usually the case. And sometimes it's very hard to identify an appropriate endpoint when you have such a small patient population. So this talk is divided into two parts. The first part will be about incentives, and the second part will be about resources. So let's talk about incentives. So the first incentive that I'll talk about, the first incentive program, is the Orphan Drug Designation Program. It's our oldest program. It began in 1983 after enactment of the Orphan Drug Act. And there's three primary financial incentives. First, there are tax credits to defray the cost of qualified clinical studies. So these are tax credits that sponsors can take advantage of before approval of the product, during development. Second, there's a waiver of marketing application fees. So upon submission of a marketing or licensing application, there's a user fee of $3 million that has to be paid. And this is waived for orphan products, orphan designated products. Also, probably less well known is that there are also annual program fees after approval. These program fees are about $350,000 per product per year. And if the sponsor has less than $50 million in worldwide sales in the preceding year, the annual program fees are also waived. And the third and probably most powerful incentive is the potential eligibility for 7 years of marketing exclusivity, sometimes it's called orphan exclusivity, upon marketing approval. Let me talk a little bit more about the marketing exclusivity because it's very important and it's also a little bit complicated. So, marketing exclusivity, what is this? What it means is that FDA will not approve another same drug, meaning the same active moiety or molecular structure, for that same use or indication by a different sponsor for 7 years. This is a very powerful incentive because it gives the sponsor a monopoly for 7 years, and that certainty is worth a lot. Let me give you an example. So this is a little lengthy, but it's worth thinking about. So if drug A has orphan exclusivity for the treatment of cystic fibrosis, FDA could not approve another same drug A for that disease, for cystic fibrosis. However, FDA could approve other drugs for cystic fibrosis that are not A, same drug A, And FDA could also approve drug A for other diseases, including other rare diseases. Now, there are two exceptions to this when FDA could approve same drug A for that same use or indication. So to overcome a sponsor's orphan exclusivity, if another sponsor comes with that same drug, but for some reason is able to demonstrate clinical superiority, or if that original sponsor does not provide sufficient quantities to the marketplace, then another sponsor can come on and overcome that original orphan exclusivity. Okay, so let's talk about making an orphan drug designation request. So the time to make an orphan drug designation request is prior to marketing application submission. And the basic elements of requesting an orphan drug designation include describing what is the disease or condition, providing evidence to support that the population estimate is rare, and supporting the request with sufficient scientific rationale demonstrating promise or medical plausibility. Let me talk a little bit more about sufficient scientific rationale. Okay, so let me say a few words about sufficient scientific rationale and what that means. So when you're making an orphan drug designation request, as a sponsor, you should provide the strongest rationale for establishing a medically plausible basis for expecting the drug to be effective in a disease or condition. Data can come from clinical trials, and even case reports may be acceptable if they're presented with sufficient detail. If there is no clinical data, then animal studies conducted in a relevant animal model of disease may be considered. We will also consider in vitro data if there is no relevant animal model for this disease and when there is no clinical data. Now, here's an important takeaway for requesting orphan drug designation. Data from adequate and well-controlled studies is not required. So what happens after you submit a designation request? Well, I can tell you that the typical review cycle in our office is about 90 days, and what will happen by 90 days is that you will either receive a designation letter or a deficiency letter. And with a deficiency letter, you'll get an explanation of how to cure the deficiency. Once designated, you're required to submit annual reports until your product is approved. All right, what do we have here? Challenge question number 1. Regarding orphan drug designation, which of the following is not true? A, you must have human data. B, the disease may be an acute or chronic condition. C, population estimates can come from the literature. Or D, you may qualify for tax credits during development. So which of these is not true? I'll give you just a moment or two to think about it. And hopefully you picked answer A, you must have human data. As we said a couple of slides ago, that is not correct. You do not need to have human data. If adequate clinical data doesn't exist, then it is possible to get orphan drug designation with the appropriate support from animal studies in a relevant animal model, or even with in vitro data if no relevant animal model exists. Now, what about B? Maybe an acute or chronic condition. I didn't really talk about that earlier, but as long as the chronic condition, there's less than 200,000 people in the United States, that's going to be considered rare. For an acute condition, one that is not expected to last more than a year, and there's less than 200,000 people, an acute condition can also be considered for orphan drug designation. How about C? Population estimates can come from the literature. Absolutely, they can come from literature or government-sponsored databases. And qualifying for tax credits, that's part of the reason why somebody would apply for orphan drug designation. You get tax credits during development, so that's really valuable. Okay, let's talk about a second and newer incentive program that began in 2012. It's the Rare Pediatric Disease Priority Review Voucher Program. In this slide, PRV stands for Priority Review Voucher. This incentive gives the sponsor of a rare pediatric disease drug application eligibility to receive a voucher that can be used to obtain a priority review for a subsequent human drug application. The sponsor can keep the voucher and use it at a later time to obtain priority review for a subsequent product. Or the sponsor can transfer or sell the voucher to another party. And a number of these vouchers have been sold over the years, and the prices range from $68 million to $350 million. So it's a very nice incentive. Now, we recommend that sponsors planning to request a voucher also request Rare Pediatric Disease Designation, or RPDD, prior to submitting a marketing application. And you can make this request with an orphan drug designation or fast track, which is an expedited program. We'll talk about that later. But the requests need to be submitted separately, not combined. FDA then decides whether to designate the drug as a drug for a rare pediatric disease and whether to designate the application for the drug as a rare pediatric disease product application. So, rare pediatric disease designation does not guarantee a voucher award upon approval. A few more things. In a request for RPDD, sponsors need to include an explanation of the mechanism of action with supportive data, suggesting that the drug may be effective in the rare pediatric disease. Generally, we expect a lesser level of supportive data for rare pediatric disease designation than for orphan drug designation. In vitro data supporting the mechanism of action of the drug in the disease or in a related disease may suffice for rare pediatric disease designation, whereas that level of data would not generally suffice for orphan drug designation. Okay, this is our third incentive program and the last one that I'll be talking about today. It's the Humanitarian Use Device Designation, or HUD. So this is a designation that can be given with devices that are treating or diagnosing a disease or a condition affecting less than or equal to 8,000 individuals per year in the United States. So the benefit of this designation is that there's it's actually a two-part process. So first, you ask for a HUD for this device. And then the benefit of the HUD is it makes you eligible to submit a humanitarian device exemption application, which is a type of marketing application. And that allows a product to be approved based on a showing of safety and probable benefit. Now the benefit there is that this is a lower threshold. Safety and probable benefit is a lower threshold of evidence than is typically used for a device. Normally with a device, the threshold is reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness. So this is a lower threshold, and that's why it's a benefit. There's less evidence to produce. Hey, look at this. It's challenge question number 2. Here we go. Which of the following is true? A, incentive programs exist for drugs, but not devices. B, the typical review cycle for orphan drug designation is 90 days. C, in vitro data is unacceptable for a rare pediatric disease designation request. Or D, rare pediatric disease vouchers cannot be sold to others. So I'm going to give you just a couple moments. Think about your answer. And hopefully you answered B. The typical review cycle for orphan drug designation is 90 days. We will respond to you within 90 days. We will respond to your request within 90 days. A is wrong because, as we've mentioned, incentive programs exist for drugs and devices. So for drugs, we have orphan drug designations and rare pediatric disease designations. For devices, we have humanitarian use designations. C is wrong because in vitro data is acceptable for a rare pediatric disease designation request. And D is wrong because rare pediatric disease vouchers can be sold to others. And that's part of the benefit. You can monetize the asset. All right, we're going to talk about resources now that are available at the FDA to help you with product development. Now, some of the resources I'm going to talk about are specific to rare diseases, but others are available for all product programs. Nonetheless, I think some of these are so valuable, it's really worthwhile discussing them and making sure that you're aware of them. Okay, so the first resource that I'm going to discuss is the Office of Orphan Product Development Grants Programs. And there's 3 programs that I'll describe. The first one is the Clinical Trial Grants Program, which supports clinical studies of products that address unmet needs in rare diseases or conditions, or that provide significant improvements in treatment or diagnosis. This program was initiated in 1983 when the Orphan Drug Act was passed. The second program is the Natural History Grants Program, which supports studies that advance rare disease medical product development through characterization of the natural history of rare diseases and conditions, identification of genotypic and phenotypic subpopulations, and development and validation of clinical outcome measures, biomarkers, and companion diagnostics. You might recall a few minutes ago we were talking about special challenges with product development in the rare disease space. And one of those special challenges was that the natural history of many rare diseases is poorly understood. And it's very difficult to develop products if we don't understand the natural history. And so that's why this program was started. And then the last program is the Rare Neurodegenerative Disease Grant Program, which is new. It was just started last year when the Act for ALS was signed into law by the President. And it establishes FDA's Rare Neurodegenerative Disease Grant Program, where grants or contracts can be awarded to public or private entities to cover the costs of research and development for interventions such as ALS and other rare neurodegenerative diseases in adults and children. Okay, here's another resource, but it's not one specific to the Office of Orphan Product Development or to rare diseases. These are expedited programs, and they're available throughout Cedars and Siebers for drugs and biologics. And there's 5 programs: Fast Track, Breakthrough Designation, Accelerated Approval, Priority Review, and Regenerative Medicine Advanced Therapy, or RMAT. Now, I'm not going to go through each of these, but if you are working on a drug for rare disease or any drug for a serious condition with unmet need, this is a guidance that you really need to read. These are programs that may decrease the development time for your product and offer you more advice from FDA. So this is something that you really want to be aware of, and I highly encourage you to read this guidance. It will help you. So these are expedited programs. Let's look at another resource. Okay, here's another resource. We talked about our grants programs. Now I'm going to talk about guidances. Guidances are documents that the FDA publishes that represents FDA's current thinking on a topic. They're meant for sponsors, investigators. Some are meant for the public, and they're also meant for FDA staff. They don't bind FDA or the public. You can certainly use an alternative approach as long as the approach satisfies the requirements of the applicable statutes and regulations. But I can't tell you how many terrific guidances FDA has put out. And many times when new medical officers come to FDA, they'll ask for, what textbook should I read? And my answer is always the same. There is no textbook. Read our guidances. And we have guidances on just about every topic you can imagine. Some are very disease-specific. For example, we have a guidance on epidermolysis bullosa. We have guidance on chronic kidney disease. But we also have very general guidances on safety reporting, for example. We have some terrific guidances on early product development in rare diseases. Those include products that are evaluated and assessed in CBER as well as Cedars. And they're really worth your time seeking out. Excellent documents. Now, to find them, here's my tip. It's best just to do a regular Google search. We do have a page on FDA.gov guidance document page with a search box. I find that it's easiest just to go out and use regular Google and just use the Google search box to say early clinical trials, guidance, FDA.gov, and that's the best way to find them. And you can use any keywords you want, and the guidance will probably come up. But this is something that the guidances are just terrific, and I can't say enough good things about those documents. Okay, so here's another resource. It's Meeting with FDA Staff. You can get invaluable advice from our staff. So if you are developing a drug or biologic, before requesting a meeting, please look at the guidance for meetings with Cedars and Sieber. It's the one on the right here, and the title says PDUFA products. PDUFA means Prescription Drug User Fee Act. And if you are developing a device and want to meet with FDA, then look at the guidance for medical devices. I can't stress enough how important it is for you to prepare for these meetings, because sometimes they can only be granted once. So when you request a meeting, please make sure you have a robust meeting package with questions that are specific to your program. Okay, here it is, our last challenge question. Challenge question number 3. Which of the following is true? A, FDA's guidance documents are law. B, breakthrough designation is an incentive program. C, FDA grants are only available to academics. Or D, orphan drug designations remain active until they are withdrawn or revoked. So I'm just going to give you a minute here. Just think about the answers. Go through them carefully. All right. I hope you answered D. Orphan drug designations remain active until they are withdrawn or revoked. Now, admittedly, this answer is a bit of a curveball because I did not specifically talk about how long orphan drug designations remain active. But I threw this in because it highlights an important point. Orphan drug designations remain active until they are withdrawn by the sponsor or revoked by FDA, and the latter occurs very rarely in some limited circumstances. So the sponsor can request orphan drug designation very early in product development and use its benefits when appropriate. There is no cost to apply for orphan drug designation. There are no maintenance fees. So I can't think of a reason not to request orphan drug development early in the product cycle if it's appropriate. The other answers here are incorrect. Guidance documents are not law, they are policy and represent our best thinking on a topic. Breakthrough designation is an expedited program that can decrease cycle time and sometimes provide more advice from FDA. And FDA grants are available not just to academics, to other sponsors as well. And here's one of my very last slides. It's my plug for FDA's annual Rare Disease Day event. This is an all-day conference that is broadcast virtually. It, too, is a resource. Every year, we present different topics on rare diseases and product development of interest to patients, their families, caregivers, and sponsors. Next year, it will be held on Monday, February 27th, 2023. We hope to see you there, and registration opens in mid-January of 2023, so please look for it. Before I leave this slide, let me tell you a little bit about this photograph. Every year, Rare Disease Week is observed around the world. It occurs during the last week in February, and that's why we hold our conference at that time. The photo is a picture of Building 1 on our White Oak campus in Silver Spring, Maryland. Our building, as well as many other monuments, bridges, and buildings around the world, are illuminated in the colors of Rare Disease Week, which are pink, green, blue, and purple. The purpose of this global illumination is to build awareness of the burden that rare diseases places on patients and their families. Well, we've reached the end of my presentation. Today, we discussed the financial incentives available from my office to spur rare disease medical products development. And those incentives included orphan drug designation, rare pediatric drug designation, and the Voucher program, and the humanitarian use device designations. We also talked about resources available at FDA to help investigators and sponsors of medical products, some of which are specific to rare diseases like our grant programs. Others are not specific to rare diseases, but it's important that as a developer of medical products, it's really worth your while to learn everything that's available at FDA and to use the incentives and resources as much as you can. So that concludes my presentation. I'll be available at the Q&A session to take your questions. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.
Thank you for that introduction. And now it's my pleasure to tell you about Sieber's perspective on working together with our rare disease partners across FDA. The learning objectives of my presentation are to discuss Sieber's recent rare disease and orphan product approval trends, describe Sieber's rare disease program, discuss Sieber's rare disease-related PDUFA 6 commitments, and to provide examples of how Sieber collaborates with rare disease partners at FDA. Sieber, or the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, has a long-standing history of regulating biological products or biologics for rare diseases. And since I'm going to be talking about how we collaborate with our rare disease partners across the agency today, I thought I would just show you this organizational chart so you can see that Sieber is one of several FDA centers. And on this chart, you can see the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, or CDRH, the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, or CDER, and the Oncology Center of Excellence, or OCE, and the Office of the Commissioner. These are the parts of the agency I would say we collaborate with most frequently when it comes to rare disease product development and review. As I said, Sieber has a long-standing history of regulating biologics for rare diseases. And typically we refer to the biologics that we regulate in Sieber as complex biologics. Now, the Center for Drugs also regulates some biologics, but they're different categories than shown here on this slide. Traditionally, most of our biologics for rare diseases in Sieber have been blood products or plasma-derived products such as blood factors for blood factor deficiencies. However, in recent years, we've seen a huge influx of submissions for gene therapy products and cell therapy products. And these newer types of products are changing the profile of our rare disease products in Sieber. And we're seeing many other types of indications. Different diseases that have a genetic basis can be treated, at least there are promising treatments in development that are gene therapies. In the years 2015 through 2021, Sieber approved 59 novel biologics, and of these approvals, 38 or 64% were approved for use in rare diseases. However, only 18 of the 59 had orphan product designation. So you can see that not all of our rare disease biologics approvals in Sieber have orphan product designation. And I just want to point this distinction out to you. The Sieber Rare Disease Program is a cross-center effort that engages every office in Sieber. This flower graphic, and that's what we affectionately refer to it as, depicts this. As you can see, each petal is a different office in Sieber. So starting with the Office of the Director, or the Office of the Center Director at the top, which is where I'm based as the Rare Disease Liaison. And then as you go around, you can see all the different offices, the product offices, and some of the other offices that do review and support the product offices in reviewing applications. And I will point out in particular the Office of Vaccines Research and Review, which has a few orphan-designated products, and the Office of Tissues and Advanced Therapies, which has most of our orphan-designated products and orphan approvals. As I said, the Sieber Rare Disease Program is a center-wide effort. It encompasses our collective activities that support and advance biologics development for rare diseases. And at the heart of our rare disease program is the Sieber Rare Disease Coordinating Committee. And this is a committee comprised of rare disease experts and others from across the center. They come from each of the offices, and we convene on a monthly basis usually, and it's a forum for information sharing, and then that results in those representatives going back to the respective offices and sharing the information. We also work on issues that have to do with rare disease-related policy and ensuring that the center meets its PDUFA commitments and more. It's also a great resource for collaboration or for identifying speakers for stakeholder engagement activities. And as Sieber's Rare Disease Liaison, I coordinate the rare disease program. I serve as the point of contact, basically, and also I arrange and facilitate the Rare Disease Coordinating Committee meetings. And I work very, very closely with my colleagues in the Office of Orphan Products and in the Cedars Rare Diseases team. And in fact, sometimes I think I work with them more often than I work with my colleagues in the Center for Biologics, but that's all part of being a liaison. Our mission statement is presented on this slide here, and it's basically in line with the mission statement of our rare disease partners across the agency. As I've been emphasizing so much, we collaborate and work together, and we're all striving for the same thing: to advance development of products, of medical products, to improve the lives of children and adults with rare diseases. So now I'd like to just take a few minutes here and talk about Sieber's rare disease commitments under PDUFA 6. And PDUFA 6 will be coming to an end at the end of September of this year. However, we continue to do work to meet and fulfill our PDUFA 6 rare disease commitments. And among these are that our rare disease program will ensure that our review offices consider flexible and feasible approaches in the review of rare disease-related submissions. And we do this in many ways, mostly through education and in the context of our Rare Disease Coordinating Committee by having discussions and having case presentations. Another commitment is that we will continue to provide rare disease training to review staff, and in the actual letter, it emphasizes the collaboration in this regard with the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. And we do this, we actually work together each year, and we put on a day-long training for review staff from Cedars, Sieber, OOPD, and other parts of the agency, and we have timely topics. We try to cover product approvals where flexible and feasible approaches were considered and used, and those may and are typically Sieber and Cedar approvals. And sometimes we even have an external speaker come in. In the past, we've had a representative from a patient advocacy organization for a particular rare disease. But we usually get fantastic feedback, and it is a really good program for our reviewers in the center and across the agency. Another PDUFA 6 commitment is that we continue to engage in stakeholder outreach. Sieber does an enormous amount of stakeholder outreach. Everyone from our center director, Dr. Peter Marks, to reviewers who work on rare disease-related files, engage in stakeholder outreach in one way or another, either by giving talks on the outside and or publishing articles in the medical literature, to giving poster presentations at conferences. We also have Sieber held public workshops from time to time and webinars and more, and these are all examples of how we engage with our external stakeholders. And the fourth PDUFA 6 rare disease-related commitment is that we will provide updates on these activities I just told you about and our successes regarding those activities and more in the PDUFA annual performance report each year. And that is typically on the FDA website under PDUFA, and it's available to the public, of course. And now I'd like to get to the heart of my talk, which is to tell you how Sieber collaborates with rare disease partners at FDA. We do this in many ways. We collaborate on patient engagement events, such as patient listening sessions and patient-focused drug development meetings. I told you about how we work together with Cedars and others from across the agency in developing training for reviewers. We collaborate on stakeholder outreach. A great example is FDA Rare Disease Day. This is an annual event. It's led by the Office of Orphan Products, and they invite representatives from Sieber and Cedars and the Office of Patient Affairs and CDRH to serve on the planning committee. And we make sure we have a very well-rounded, timely theme and lots of presentations, usually panels, and we engage patients as well. It's directed primarily for patients, at least it has been in the past, but attendees include industry, other government agencies, and more, and it's really a great day. We collaborate on the review of rare disease-related submissions. A great example is a few years ago, Siba approved a gene therapy for a rare retinal dystrophy. And this gene therapy, Voretigene naparvovec, it was really quite an accomplishment, and it's really changed lives for these patients who have this rare retinal dystrophy that can lead to blindness. And we collaborated by having two consult reviewers from other centers. So we had a clinical consultant, an ophthalmologist from Cedars, and another clinical consultant, an optometrist from CDRH. And I went over the PDUFA commitments and how Cedars and Sieba collaborate on those. And our center collaborates on a lot of cross-cutting issues or requests. Many times we get external requests for information or regarding a topic, and many of those can be cross-cutting, and we work together with our partners across the agency. We collaborate on guidance development. So in particular, there are two draft guidances that are out. There's one on common issues in drug development for rare diseases, and there's another one on natural history studies, and Sieber had a seat at the table in drafting these guidances with the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, which took the lead, but we had a lot of input on both guidances. We also collaborate on regulatory initiatives. So you heard Dr. Kerry Jo Lee talk about Cedars' new ARC program, and we've been invited to participate in and collaborate with them on that. So we very much look forward to that. And finally, we participate in the monthly FDA, European Medicine Agency, and Health Canada rare disease cluster meetings. And these meetings provide a forum for us to talk with our Canadian and European regulatory authority colleagues on specific product development programs that are global in nature or on overarching rare disease issues and more. So, in conclusion, the majority of Sieber's novel approvals are for rare diseases. However, to add, I did explain that not all of our rare disease approvals have orphan designation. Sieber's Rare Disease Program aims to advance development of Sieber biologics for rare diseases, and we do this in many different ways, and I explained our structure. Sieber collaborates with rare disease partners at FDA in many ways. And finally, we know that working together helps us accomplish our shared goals. So at this time, I would like to ask you all a challenge question. Which of the following was not noted as an example of a collaborative activity with rare disease partners at FDA? A, rare disease cluster meetings with the EMA and Health Canada. B, training for FDA reviewers. C, planning committee for a new visitor parking lot for public meetings. D, guidance development. E, stakeholder outreach. I'm just going to give you a couple seconds because I know you were all listening well and this should be easy. So if you pick C, you are correct. Congratulations. And that concludes my presentation. And before we get into the Q&A session, I would just like to ask you one favor. It's actually an action item. Please spread the word that Sieber collaborates with rare disease partners across FDA, the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, the Office of Orphan Product Development, and more, substantially. And we all share the same goals: to advance development of medical products for patients with rare diseases. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for all those great presentations. We'll now start our panel discussion. And for our first question, actually, if you have questions, please make sure you put them into the chat pod and we'll get to as many as possible. First, I'd like to address a few questions to Dr. Kerry Jo Lee. Dr. Lee, there have been several new guidances regarding N of 1 studies for rare diseases. What division within FDA supports this novel?
Thank you so much for this question, Renu. So first of all, the guidance is from the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. So that would cover all of our divisions, and it's not so much about which division would support this novel approach, but whether or not what you are developing is appropriate to follow this pathway. So these guidances are really intended for individualized investigational antisense oligonucleotide drug products for severely debilitating or life-threatening genetic diseases. So this is when you really have, 1 or 2 patients and you are trying to identify them as candidates for targeted treatment or therapy. And so that you would just essentially apply to the division in which the indication would be treated.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Another question for you. How involved is the Rare Disease Office work across offices and divisions for products that are rare diseases but do not fall under OND? Do experts join those review teams? Does the review division office work as liaisons that are available when there are questions? Any clarity on this would be very helpful.
Yeah, thank you. So again, I'm presuming if these are rare diseases that don't fall under OND, the person asking the question is talking about, per se, indications that might reside within and therapies that might reside in the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. And as Dr. Vaillancourt said, we really work very, very closely with our partners in Sieber, and that is in many of the ways that I highlighted in my presentation. We develop educational programs, we discuss programs. We certainly do from time to time inform each other on applications or serve as sort of experts to help applications where they may require expertise from our side or we may require expertise from their side. So we work very closely together, and it just depends on what the expertise is that's needed, and we're happy to provide that for each other.
Thank you for that. One more question for you. Regarding RDEA, is an endpoint novel if it has never been used for any approval or if it's never been used for that rare disease or indication? Is there a way to quickly see what has been used?
Yeah, so the latter is a very good question, and there isn't an exact answer. However, taking the first part of that, an endpoint is really novel if it's never been used to support drug approval in general, or if it has been substantially modified from the way in which it has been used historically. So that is our definition of a novel endpoint. If there is a way to see whether or not it has been utilized previously, if it's a biomarker, you could always go to the biomarker qualification page and do a search there to see if there's any products. Otherwise, if it's, you could also search for the indications and what might be approved in those indications to see what the endpoints were that are used. If you go to drugs at FDA, any of our approvals are made public, and you could search that way as well.
Thank you. Let's go to Sandra Retzky now. So a few questions for you. Does the orphan drug grant program still exist? There's only general information on the FDA website with no specific instructions on how to actually request an orphan drug grant.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. Thanks for that question. It's a really good one and timely. Our clinical trial grants program still exists. We are in our 39th year. The grants program started with the Orphan Drug Act in 1983. Our next receipt date will be in August of this year, and if you look on our website for funding opportunities, use that keyword funding opportunities, clinical trial grants, orphan products, FDA.gov, it's going to come up. And so I believe the opening date is the 23rd and it'll close of August, and it'll close in October. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question for you. With the total U.S. population increasing, will the definition be updated to reflect a proportion of the population like in the EU rather than a fixed number?
Hey, that's a great question, and I'm glad that was asked. This is a threshold. It is a flat number. It does not change with the population. So it's an interesting wrinkle on orphan drug product development as compared with other territories, but it's always been this flat number of 200,000 people, and I don't think that's going to change. Thank you.
Thanks. And somewhat related, with the increase in the U.S. population and longevity of lifespan, is the FDA considering changing the threshold for rare disease?
Hey, another great question. There's two parts to it, though. FDA does not make up any kind of laws regarding orphan drug designation or orphan drug exclusivity. That comes from Congress. And so this 200,000 threshold is from a statute, from a law enacted by Congress, and that's not something FDA changes. And even though you're right, things change. A disease at one time point will be rare, and because, just like you say, the population's growing, later on it may no longer be rare, but that's the nature of how the framework was set up in 1983. So thanks for that question.
Thank you for responding. Let's move on to Captain Vaillancourt. We have a few questions for you. The first question is, do all cell and gene therapy products come underneath
Oh, thank you for that question. Actually, the answer is no. Not all cell and gene therapy products are orphan designated or considered orphan drugs. However, a large proportion of cell and gene therapy products are intended or under development for rare diseases. In fact, when we look at our INDs for gene therapies that have come in over the last several years, we see that around 60% or so are for rare diseases, and that's for again, for gene therapy products. But as you heard from Dr. Retzky, there's a process for requesting orphan drug designation, and there are some, so a sponsor has to go through that process, of course, and then designation has to be granted, but there are also some cell and gene therapy products being developed for diseases that are not rare diseases. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Vaillancourt. We have another question for you, and it's a two-part question. What are the reasons that the percentage of approved new biologics which have ODD designations is low? And why is it that not all of these rare disease drugs approved by FDA, why do they not all have orphan drug designation?
Well, thank you for that question. Actually, when I have looked back at our approvals in Sieber for the past 7 years, and you saw that number, I think it was 20 of the 59 drugs we consider, they're intended for use in rare diseases. However, they're not orphan designated, and there are different reasons. Sometimes the sponsor doesn't request orphan product designation, does not submit a request. Now, there may have been some in that number that had a denied request, but that was not the vast proportion of those 20. Again, in some cases, there was no request submitted for orphan product designation to the Office of Orphan Products. And another reason is we include in those numbers products that have what I refer to as an umbrella indication. So there are some products that are intended for use in individual rare diseases, but sometimes the indication will be for like a broader or for a scope that encompasses many individual rare diseases. For example, most, if not all, of the immune globulin products have an indication that is to treat primary immune deficiency disorders. And there are many, many primary immune deficiency disorders, and each of those individually is rare, and some of them are extremely rare. So that's an example because, we have to consider that in the development of a new immune globulin product. It's being developed for use in various rare primary immune deficiency disorders, and the development program has the same issues that you heard about in Dr. Lee's presentation, and we need to count these numbers, but again, they don't have orphan designation, but they're important to consider, and they're important to the patients as well. And having that broad indication doesn't mean that they're not important for our patients. But I hope that answers the question adequately. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's jump to Sandra Retzky for another question. To what division are requests for orphan drug designation now submitted?
Very good question. So it's not in a division. It's to the Office of Orphan Product Development, that's OOPD, which is within a super office called OCPP, that's the Office of Clinical Policy and Programs, which is in the Office of the Commissioner. And so if you're looking for our submission portal, you'll find it on our website. So if you go to OOPD at fda.gov, you'll find our submission portal there.
Thank you. One more question for you. Can you get a rare pediatric disease designation if the disease affects both adults and children?
Oh, I love this question. For two reasons. One, I can give you an answer. And the second is it points to an important resource, which is our guidance document on the Rare Pediatric Disease Priority Review Voucher Program. So please look up that guidance if you have questions about the voucher program. It's done in a question and answer format, and it's really quite informative. But the answer to the question is yes, you can. But the important thing is that the serious or life-threatening aspect of the disease has to primarily affect children. And that's something that you would support in your submission and that we would review when you submit your application. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a few minutes left. Let's jump to Dr. Lee again. Dr. Lee, can you clarify how many RDEA proposals FDA will accept? In 2023 Q4, it states that FDA will accept a maximum of 1 per year. Is that 1 per year per sponsor or 1 overall among potential hundreds of requests?
Thank you for that, and this is a good opportunity to clarify. So the proposed Rdea program is a pilot program, and it really launches in Q4 of year 1, and at that time, we will be selecting 1 application for that quarter. In subsequent years, fiscal years, we will be accepting up to 1 application total per quarter for up to 3 applications.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. We have another question for Sandra Retzky. What is the review timeline for FDA when a sponsor submits additional evidence after their initial ODD application received a deficiency letter?
Well, thanks for that question, and it's the same as the original timeline, 90 days.
Okay, perfect. Dr. Lee, if a sponsor is interested in having an RDEA meeting, is that the name of the meeting request, or is it a type of existing meeting such as type A, B, or C?
Thanks for that. And similar to prior PDUFA programs, this would be a separate meeting, which would be an Rdea meeting. However, the processes for these are still being developed, and so if you stay tuned, we will be should these go through, we will be launching more about the actual operations of this and how to apply later on as we get closer to the fiscal year.
Okay, thank you. We have a question which I believe is for Captain Vaillancourt. Can you talk more about RDEA? Do all meetings have to focus exclusively on endpoints, or can they discuss trial design? Will there be formal minutes?
Oh, thank you for that question. First of all, I do want to emphasize that this is a Cedars-Sieber joint program under PDUFA 7, and Sieber's been working hand in hand with Cedar in planning for this. And so the focus of the program, of course, is novel endpoints. And it's not so much on clinical trial design, although that may come up in the discussion in the meetings, but the whole idea is to focus on developing novel endpoints for rare disease product development programs, because endpoints can be challenging, and you heard about this in Dr. Lee's talk, and I think Dr. Retzky also emphasized it. And so this is a way FDA is helping to advance development of products for rare diseases by trying to address creatively one of the challenges. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the second part of the question beyond, will there be minutes? Will there be formal minutes? Yes, there will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Vaillancourt, and thank you to all of you for such great presentations and such an informative Q&A session. We